Hey, it's Soleil, and this is episode 256 of the Orange Pill Investor. And today I want to talk about LEAPS, MicroStrategy Management, uh, MicroStrategy LEAPS Management, and realistic expectations based on various strikes. I'm not going to go too crazy with modeling out like, oh my God, what if MicroStrategy goes to 5,000 a share or something cray. But I have the December 19th, 2025 380s. This was before they moved up into like 420 or 450 now. I thought I had added one. All right, so I got 20 of the 380s. I think I must have sold it because I'm trying to reduce my margin risk before earnings. So I might have sold that one off. But as soon as earnings is over, I will be looking to add some of the farthest out of the money positions back in again. But for right now, I'll just go ahead and model out the 380s, and the results will be similar. Yeah, so I got these 380s, but there's 450s that are somewhat cheaper that I will absolutely be taking a look at. So I go to my trusted options, profitcalculator.com, put in the price, picked my December 19th, picked the 380 strikes, and then I like to calculate by profit loss per dollar. I think the default is like, it defaults to something else. So if this is a winner, and actually let me just talk about what if it's a loser. If it's a loser, I'll probably just let them expire. It'll just be chalk it up to a loss. But and that would probably be about 3 months. I would manage that trade 3 months in advance. So instead of December, probably like September. So if by September I'm not green or, very green, I'll just cut bait and move on. But let's say a modest profit. Let's just go to the 513. If MicroStrategy gets to 500 a share, you can see that if it happens by like September, when I would be anxious to start managing this, it would be worth 16.4, almost 16.5, and then you got to subtract out what I paid for them, and then this leaves out the profit. Is that directly across from 513? Yeah. And if I continue to hold from here, but the price doesn't appreciate, then it's going to collapse pretty dramatically. By expiration, I will lose value from 11,600 down to 8,400. Well, that's profit. From 16 to 13. So about 20% of the value. So if MSTR is kind of cutting it close at about 90 days to expiration, I would probably just take profits here. in the middle or end of September. However, if MSTR is at 1,000, that changes things big time, because now the majority of this option's value is intrinsic. The difference between the 380 strike and 1,000 is like 620. And the extrinsic value is very small. So the fear of waiting for this to get too close to expiration starts to kind of evaporate, because if MicroStrategy is 1,000 in September, but it's still 1,000 in December, the total value is only going to go from 57.5 down to 57. It's only going to lose $500 of its value. So at some point, if I get very lucky and MSTR just goes to the moon, somewhere in this giant sea of green here, I will have transitioned from, oh shit, I better manage this trade. I better just get out of it before, right? Like if if MicroStrategy is at 400 and it's barely in the money, I can walk away from this having doubled up. I spent I spent about $4,000 on it, and I can make 8, so I can pocket about $4,000. I think and this is judging by today's prices, so I got in a little cheaper than this. But if I was to get into this today, that would be, the profit that I could make in September if we're just barely in the money. But if I hold on to that option and MicroStrategy just coasts along at $400 a share, now I'm going from green to not so green to red, and I'm gonna lose money, because it costs me. There's 220. If we expire in the money, but not enough to make me gain actually profit, because if I spend $4,000 or $5,000 on them and I only make 2,500, maybe even exercising these, I'm actually taking a loss here. So if it's just barely in the money by 90 days to expiration, this is when I'm going to cut bait for sure. But if let's look at $600 a share. Could get out at 23,000 and lose a third of its value. So that's still not even enough. However, I will say this: at some point, if these 20 leaps ever become in the money and get up to at least like a 0.7 delta, I'm immediately going to start selling covered calls against them. They'll all turn into poor man's covered calls. And for me, that's an additional benefit of these severely out of the money long calls. I've already done videos showing that buying as far out of the money as possible is advantageous as far as the amount of delta that can be purchased per dollar. That's going to give the maximum amount of leverage exposure. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that automatically makes them the best option, because these out of the money options also have higher theta than at the money or in the money options. So that is the trade-off that must be considered. For me, with what I expect MicroStrategy to do, I'm always going to be drawn towards the highest strikes on my leaps, unless I'm specifically buying an in the money option to form a poor man's covered call. obviously, maybe not obviously, but necessarily I would have to buy in the money options if I want to sell covered calls against them. But if I'm just speculating, if I just want access to leverage, then I personally target as far out of the money as possible. And as the price of MicroStrategy goes up, this delta will increase as well. So if I buy a 450 strike, it's giving me 42 delta exposure now. But if the price goes up to 450, now my delta is going to be, 0.6. Goes in the money, it might be more like 0.7, depending on how close to expiration it gets. Gamma is going to have a bigger or smaller effect based on the price of the stock and also the days to expiration. But that's an added kind of benefit is I'm hoping that at some point in 2025, if these become in the money options, now they're going to become eligible as collateral to sell more covered calls against. And for me personally, I need to unload about $150,000 worth of margin. This is a little bit more margin than I had anticipated using. So I have not taken profits as aggressively as I probably should have. And got a little bit overexcited about going irresponsibly long here. But if I have a year to, all right, so let me just finish that topic before I move on. So at some point, let's just look at $800 a share. The options are worth $44,000, and if I continue to hold the expiration, yeah, it only drops in value by $1,000. So somewhere in here between like $600-700, it starts taking away the risk of losing extrinsic value. All right, so to recap that, if I'm just barely in the money, then I'm closing these options down early. I'm just taking whatever I can get, hopefully green. And even if at the end of September, even if these are losers, I'm just going to cut bait. If the price is 324 on these 380 strikes, I'll just take this as a loss. I'm not going to ride a $900 loss down to a $4,000 loss. There could be some kind of late end of the year rally, I suppose. But if my thesis is not changed, and I think that could happen, then I'll just pick something that doesn't expire in December. I'll go out to March 2020, 26. And I would just take what I can get here and roll those out. But if I'm looking at a 700, 800, 900 or 1,000 plus MSTR price in September, then I would probably just it's tempting. Do I just continue to sell covered calls against them until the end of the year? Or do I just start selling 2 and exercising 1? But I also have 2,200 shares, so I may not even want more shares. I may just be fine with sticking with the 2,000 shares, which 2,000 shares at $1,000 is worth, what, $2 million? So I'm already in a good spot. And I may not want an extra million. If I have $2 million worth of fucking MicroStrategy and we hit the bear market if we just assume worst case scenario, it drops by 75%, do I really want to watch my 2 million ride down to 500,000? That would actually still be fine because with 500,000 portfolio, I can still generate enough covered call cash to not need to work. So that's actually not that bad. But at this point in time, I don't think I would need to be irresponsibly long going into a potential bear market. The 4-year cycle may end. So it may just be number go up forever with Bitcoin. And then as some other folks have pointed out, there are going to be likely a lot of passive index funds that will be buying and potentially pumping this price of MicroStrategy. And there's even been some, I think it was Punter Jeff, been some rumors about what it would look like if MicroStrategy enters a bear market with a high MNAV. And in that scenario, they could potentially, I guess, stop diluting their shares just to keep their stock price from tanking as much as they would if they were still diluting and trying to add Bitcoin at all-time highs. It's probably all speculation, but they got some pretty fucking smart people over there. So I'm sure they are wargaming this stuff out. If they're going to be taking advantage of high MNAV to accumulate more Bitcoin, it seems like they should be able to reverse that theory as well and just not dilute it to prevent the share price from going down too much. But yeah, I think if I have that much exposure to MicroStrategy shares, if I'm still holding on to 2,000 shares in September 2025, I probably don't need to exercise. Let's see, I have 20 of these leaps. And if I have to sell 2 to exercise 1, I'd end up with another 600 shares ish. I probably don't need another $500,000 to $750,000 worth of MicroStrategy going into the potential bear market. So my plan would probably be to go ahead and I might just end up selling all of my long calls, and certainly not sitting in cash. I'm definitely going to be sitting debt free, other than probably my house. I've got a fairly low mortgage rate that I have no intention of letting go of. But I've mentioned it in the past. I am not using cash as a trading pair. So I know we say that there's no second best, but if I'm going to take profits and I don't want to sit in cash, I have to have something that is a second best. And I will probably go back and buy buy back some of the Bitcoin that I sold in order to load up on MicroStrategy in the first place. So that might be one, but that's so correlated to MicroStrategy's price that doesn't really help me if we do enter a bear market. So the rest of the money I will probably move into what I consider my second best, which is going to be Tesla. Um, People clown on Kathy Wood sometimes, but I think their $2,500 price target in, what is it, by 2030, something like that, is it works for me. I'm not qualified to even do price targets or if, valuations, but their research seems competent enough for me. So no telling what Tesla will be at this time, but hopefully it'll still be depressed and they'll still be ramping up robotaxi and the 25K vehicle and semis and all kind of other shit. And hopefully I'll be able to still get Tesla at a discount right in here somewhere, anywhere between, you know, second half of 2025. I will probably be using Tesla as my, I don't know if that really, I guess it'd be considered a pairs trade with MicroStrategy, um, or just simply rebalancing. Like if I had a tech ETF and I had the S&P 500 and I wanted to go 50-50 each, and the tech ETF surged 10x, then I would rebalance into the S&P 500, and then when the tech crashes, I rebalance in the other direction. So I would do something like that between MSTR and Tesla. I think they have a monopoly on electric vehicles, autonomous driving, the robotaxis, Optimus, all that good shit. So, regardless of whether Elon is in or out at Tesla, kind of makes no difference to me. You can argue whether he's, you know, his personality risk is greater or less than his contributions. But I think the personality of the company is pretty much hardwired to succeed at this point. And they've got more data than anyone else. And that, and I'm specifically talking about full self-driving, all of the autonomous, you know, driven data miles. Um, and with as many vehicles as they have on the roads, that lead is just widening. So I don't think it's very likely that anyone else is going to be able to catch up to them. So those are my two picks. I've got MicroStrategy as the dominant financial monopoly on the hardest asset ever known, which is Bitcoin. And then I've got Tesla, which has a monopoly on transitioning the world to sustainable energy, which is what their stated mission is. So that is my plan. So depending on the price of MSTR, I may do two different things. If the price is not that great, you know, related to my strike, my 380 strike, then I may just cut bait around September. Or if the price is way up here, I may decide if I want to add some MSTR positions. I may sell two and exercise one, but there's no reason to really do that early because I'm only going to lose $500 if the price stays, you know, just stays 1,000 here. It's not really risking that much money. Now the price of my MSTR could go from 1,000 down to 800. So that might be an incentive to just go ahead and take, you know, sell two, exercise one, and exercising these a little early doesn't really sacrifice that much extrinsic value. There's not a lot of theta decay really in an option that's that deep in the money. So that's the way that I see it playing out on these leaps. And it will be a similar scenario, just skewed a little bit once I start buying some of the 450s. they'll just need to be even farther in the money. You know, the price is going to have to go to 550, 650, 750, 850 maybe to get into this zone. All right, I think that's it for now. Be good, Joe.